As a student at the University of Chicago, Bernie Sanders was active in both the Congress on Racial Equality and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. In 1962, he was arrested for protesting segregation in public schools in Chicago. The police came to call him an outside agitator as he went around putting up flyers around the city detailing police brutality. Sanders participated in the historic March on Washington in 1963 as a 22-year-old student at the University of Chicago. Quote, "It was a question for me of basic justice. The fact that large numbers of African Americans who couldn't vote, who couldn't eat in a restaurant, whose kids were going to segregated schools, who couldn't get hotel accommodations, and were living in segregated housing. That was clearly a major American injustice and something that had to be dealt with," unquote.
Danette in Hinesville, Georgia, you are on the air with Senator Sanders.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Senator Sanders. First of all, thank you for all the work that you do and for what you're doing just for the country. Speaking truth to power, I really appreciate it. My question, or actually it's more of a comment, and I can ask it in the form of a question. Will you be speaking more on your civil rights record? I know that you participated in the March on Washington, and there's a lot of conversation happening in the country surrounding you, and people are just really awful, saying that, what is he going to say about, what's happening with the racial violence and talking up Hillary Clinton for what she said. And I just wondered if you would speak more publicly about your civil rights record and what's happening with Black people in America.
Thank you. Jenna, thanks very much for this question. And let me start off by saying that I believe that as a nation, we should be proud of the progress that we have made in recent years in terms of civil rights and electing the first African-American president in our history. But anybody who thinks we're anywhere near where we should be in terms of creating a non-discriminatory society is dead wrong. And the issues out there, I think, that we all have seen is whether it is Ferguson or whether it is Baltimore or whether it is tragically in South Carolina, issues of blatant racism, of police brutality, of issues of all over this country where young African Americans are walking down the street and they're being harassed by police officers. That has got to end. And what has got to end is the fact that police departments around this country cannot act as occupying forces. They have to be seen as being part of the community. When I was mayor of the city of Burlington, we moved toward community policing, which does just that. It makes the police department part of the community, not an outside force coming in. And again, as a mayor, I worked with police for 8 years, and most of these people work really hard under very difficult circumstances. Not easy being a cop. But when a police officer breaks the law, when young black people are beaten up or sometimes killed, that is clearly unacceptable, and police officers who commit these crimes must be punished. Furthermore, as I mentioned earlier, when we talk about civil rights, we also have got to understand that poverty and incarceration rates among the African American community is at levels which are almost incomprehensible. There is a debate exactly about the statistics, Jeanette, but the guess is that today, if we do not change things, the likelihood is that an African American male baby born today stands a 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 chance of ending up in jail, and that half of young African Americans will be at some point or another in their lives arrested. Now, what that tells me is that when real unemployment for young African Americans is over 50%, that maybe it makes a little bit more sense to start investing in education and jobs rather than in more incarceration and more jails. And I feel very strongly about that. You're seeing just a horrendous attack upon a young generation of people, which is an unbelievable human tragedy. So the fight has got to be to create police departments which are well trained, which reflect the demographics of their communities. We've got to get military equipment out of cities so that police departments are not looked at as occupying forces. But we've also got to address, in addition to all of that, the serious economic problems facing minority communities all over this country, and I'm pledged to do that.
Yeah, and you're not going to brag on it, but my understanding is that back in the early '60s, when my dad and I were going door to door for Barry Goldwater, and Hillary Clinton was a Goldwater girl, you were an organizer for SNCC?
No, I was an organizer. Well, I was involved in the Congress on Racial Equality. Yeah, I mean, this is an issue. You're right. It's not something, it's something that I've been doing for my whole life, my adult life. When I was in college, I got arrested as part of a civil rights demonstration to end segregation in Chicago schools. I went to the University of Chicago. I was involved in making sure that the University of Chicago at that point did not run segregated housing. So, I've been involved in the civil rights movement for many, many years. But the point here is we can give all the great speeches that we want, but what we need is real action to break down racism in America and to create economic opportunity for all of our people, including young African Americans and young Hispanics.
Senator Bernie Sanders.
Madam President, in the last 60 years, this country has made significant progress in civil rights and in trying to become a less discriminatory society. 60 years ago, parts of our country were built on an apartheid-type system, segregated housing, segregated schools, segregated restaurants, segregated transportation, segregated water fountains, and in fact, an entirely segregated way of life. Perhaps most significantly, African Americans in a number of southern states were denied the basic right to vote and were unable to participate in the democratic process. Today, as a nation, we have a right to be proud of the significant changes that have taken place in our country over the last 60 years, and the many advances that have been made in civil rights and in the creation of a less discriminatory society. We should be proud that in 2008, this country surprised the world by overcoming our racist history and electing our first African American president, and then re-electing him 4 years later with a strong majority. You may like Barack Obama, and I do, or you may dislike Barack Obama, and many Americans have that view. But it is no small thing that this country was able to judge a candidate by his ideas and his character and not the color of his skin. But clearly, Madam President, while we have made significant progress, the events of last week remind us how far we yet have to go in order to create a non-racist society. Madam President, I am not the governor of South Carolina. I am not in the South Carolina legislature, and I do not live in South Carolina. But I do believe that the time is long overdue for the people of South Carolina to remove the Confederate flag from the State House grounds in Columbia. That flag is a relic of our nation's stained racial history. It should come down. If any good can come of the terrible tragedy in Charleston, it is that the people of South Carolina now have the opportunity to finally turn a page on our past. Frankly, the Confederate flag does not belong on State House grounds. It belongs in a museum. Madam President, let me also express to you my deep concern about the growth of extremist groups in this country, groups who are motivated by hatred of African Americans, by hatred of immigrants, by hatred of Jews, by hatred of Muslims, and anyone else who is not exactly like them. Madam President, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, sadly, there are some 784 active hate groups in the United States, and the number of those groups are growing. Let me express my agreement with NAACP President Cornell William Brooks that, and I quote, "We need vigorous prosecution and vigorous investigation of these hate groups and the resources to do so," end of quote, and I call upon the FBI to do just that. Madam President, about 50 years ago, as a student at the University of Chicago, I was arrested in a civil rights demonstration to end segregated schools and was also involved in helping to end segregated housing in Chicago. Madam President, it is clear to me that over that period of time, this nation has come a very, very long way. But it is also clear to me, and I think the majority of our people, that we still have a long, long way to go. And let me conclude by reminding fellow Americans about those great words that appeared in the Declaration of Independence, that moment in history when the colonies broke off from the British. And this is what that declaration said: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men," and we would add women, "are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Madam President, that is the dream of America. That is our vision, and that is a goal that we must obtain. The tragedy in Charleston reminds us how far we yet have to go. Thank you, Madam President, and I note the absence of a quorum.
Since his election to the Senate, Bernie Sanders has emerged as a leading progressive voice on issues like income inequality, climate change, and campaign finance reform. He rose to national prominence on the heels of his 2010 filibuster of the proposed extension of the Bush-era tax rates for the wealthy. Sanders is also outspoken on civil liberties issues and has been particularly critical of mass surveillance policies such as the Patriot Act.
Well, first of all, let me say that I have known Hillary Clinton for 25 years. I respect her and I admire her. But I think we are living in a very strange moment in American history. And that is the problems facing us in terms of income and wealth inequality, and the fact that real unemployment is 11%, youth unemployment 17%, in terms of the fact that climate change is threatening the very foundations of our planet, that we need strong and bold leadership. I would ask people to take a look at the role that I've been playing for the last 25 years, standing up for working families. And I have had a record, which is taking on the billionaire class, taking on Wall Street, taking on the private insurance companies and the drug companies. Right now, as you know, Congress is in the midst of a debate on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I am strongly opposed to that trade agreement because I think it follows in the footsteps of other disastrous trade agreements which have cost us millions of jobs. In terms of foreign policy, Hillary Clinton voted for the war in Iraq. I voted, not only did I vote against it, I helped lead the effort against what I knew would be a disaster. In terms of climate change, I have helped lead the effort against the Keystone Pipeline. I'm not quite sure that Hillary Clinton has come out with a position on that. So those are just some of the areas where we differ.
There is a clear difference between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. Here is a list of some of the things that Senator Sanders has voted against and Senator Clinton has voted for. The difference is clear. Choose wisely.
Let me ask you about Secretary Clinton, Senator. Her position is we haven't seen what's in that bill yet, and therefore isn't it prudent to wait, not just have a hot opinion, but wait to see what's in the bill, and then she'll make her determination. That's her view. What do you say?
Well, John, don't you think it's a little bit silly for members of Congress to be voting yes on a bill that they haven't seen? That is one of many reasons to be voting against this piece of legislation. There is no question in my mind, and I think the minds of most Americans, that what our trade policy has been for many years is to allow corporate America to shut down plants in this country, move abroad, hire people at pennies an hour, and then bring their products back into the United States. It is a failed trade policy, and I would hope that the Secretary joins Elizabeth Warren, Sherrod Brown, and the vast majority of Democrats in the Congress in saying, no, we've got to defeat this piece of legislation.
You're drawing a strong distinction there between your view and Secretary Clinton's view on the question of trade. For voters trying to figure out this Democratic primary, what other issues would you say are ones that you have that kind of strong distinction between your position and Secretary Clinton's position?
Well, I am listening closely as a member of the Environmental Committee to what scientists throughout this country and throughout the world are saying about climate change. And what they tell us, it is real, it is caused by human activity, and we have got to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. That is what almost all scientists who study the issue are telling us. I helped lead the effort in the Senate against the Keystone Pipeline because I think if we're serious about reversing climate change, you don't excavate and transport some of the dirtiest fossil fuel in the world. Secretary Clinton has been very quiet on this issue. I voted against the war in Iraq, and I think history will record that vote as the right vote because it led to the incredible destabilization we're seeing right now. Secretary Clinton voted for the war. I voted against the USA Patriot Act, not because I don't think that terrorism is a serious threat to this country. It is, but I think we can combat terrorism without undermining the constitutional rights and the privacy rights of the American people. Secretary Clinton voted for it. But I think the bottom line is the American people want leadership to take on the billionaire class, represent the middle class. I have been doing that for the last 25 years. People will have to judge the Secretary's role in that process.
I want to talk about the role of campaign donations in campaigns. Hillary Clinton, in her speech yesterday, talked about the unaccountable money that's distorting elections. You're only taking small donations. She has a super PAC. Is that one of those distinctions voters, is that a big distinction or little distinction between you two?
I think it is, John. Look, let me be very clear. This disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision is undermining American democracy. And when you have a family like the Koch brothers, second wealthiest family in America, going to be spending more money in this campaign than either the Democratic or Republican parties, I worry about us moving to an oligarchy where our political system is controlled by the rich and the powerful. I am raising money from small individual contributions. BernieSanders.com has raised now some 200,000 people have sent in small contributions. I don't have a super PAC. I don't want the money from the billionaires, and that's the way we're going to run our campaign.
Senator, one last question. We have just very little time here. If the system is corrupt, does that also mean that the lawmakers who are accepting money are also corrupt?
It means that you have a campaign finance system which is absolutely corrupt. Look, American democracy does not mean that billionaires should be able to buy elections and buy candidates. We have got to overturn the Citizens United Supreme Court decision. And in my view, John, we've got to move to public funding of elections.
But no, you're not saying your colleagues are corrupt. Just final point on that.
I'm saying that the system is corrupt.
All right.
But people who take this money obey the law. You know, they're not doing something illegal.
All right. Excellent. Thank you very much.
If we do not allow them to divide us up by race, by sexual orientation, by gender, by not allowing them to divide us up by whether or not we were born in America or whether we're immigrants, rather than